Hey guys, Lady Lee here. In this video, I'm going to show you how I installed these thin bricks, which I am completely in love with. They're lightweight and they're actual bricks. They're not any type of plastic or, anything like that. They are cut from actual bricks. They can be installed on any surface. In this project, I'm installing them on these 1/4-inch thin cement boards, and that is because they're going under and behind my new wood stove to protect the floor and the wall. I will link to the wood stove install in the description of this video if you're interested to see the whole process, but I thought I'll do a shorter video on just the bricks. I also have links to all of the materials that I'm using here that I mentioned in this video, and probably just a link to the blog post which will have all this information in one place. So for me, the first task was to install the cement boards where I wanted my wood stove to go. For you, it might just be deciding, on the wall or the section of the floor that you want to install these bricks on, and then just make sure that you clean that surface and that it's smooth. If you need to scrape some, old paint or stuff like that, then make sure you do that and then kind of wipe it down a little bit. Next, go ahead and mark a center line for your surface. You see I have a line running through the center, a straight line that I use just a regular pencil to make. And then the first two bricks that you're positioning are going right to the both sides of the center line. And that kind of gives you a nice visual. I am using 1/4-inch spacers here. It would have been better if I used 3/8, but they didn't have them at the store. I would definitely recommend to go with the 3/8 for spacers instead of the 1/4, because you'll see later that I had a pretty hard time adding the mortar in between. So and the mortar is part of the beauty of this project, so it's kind of nice to leave a little bit more space for it. I just went ahead and kind of played with the first couple of lines, put them in place so I know approximately how it's going to look before I glue everything. I'm using the Loctite PL500 landscape glue to glue these bricks to the cement board. Now, I've never worked with this glue before, so I wasn't sure how fast this was going to dry on me. So I started by just kind of taking one brick out at a time and adding the glue and then putting it in place. But very quickly I got much more comfortable with it. It does not dry very fast. You have a little bit of room to even go back a few minutes later and slide the brick here and there a little bit. I really love that product. This adhesive is very strong. Once it dries, these bricks are not going anywhere, and on the other hand, it doesn't dry too fast, so it gives you a little bit of time to move things here and there if you need to. So once I got more comfortable, I started taking out the whole line and putting the glue on all 4 bricks before putting them back. Again, there was enough time to just put the glue on there and then position them in place. To cut the brick, you don't need any special tile saw or anything like that. All that you need is to measure your space, and then I usually choose the brick that looks a little thinner. They're not all exactly the same half-inch thickness. There are some that are a little thinner, and I found that it's easier to cut those. And just use a chisel and a hammer, or there's also a masonry hammer I think that you can use that looks a little different, and have a hard surface underneath, so cement block or something like that, and then you just hit the brick where you want it to break, and it usually breaks pretty clean. Then you glue these cut pieces in place to complete the surface. I let the glued bricks rest for 24 hours for the glue to dry properly before applying the mortar. For the mortar, instead of using grout like you would use with tile, I decided to use the Pro Finish mortar mix. I think it just fits the brick much better, and I think it's a little stronger. So you just add some of it to a bucket, and then we simply use a drill with mixer bead attachment to mix the mortar with some water. That's the only thing you have to add here is water, and make sure that you don't add too much. Once the mortar is mixed, you have to let it rest for 3 to 5 minutes just to soak up all the water. You want you don't want it to be too runny, but not too dry as well. Now in the tile section of Lowe's or Home Depot, you can find this bag. It's for grout basically, and you'll see in other videos people use this bag to pretty easily, it looks, add the mortar in between the bricks. So I was really excited about that and thought that this would be a great solution. It makes sense and it sounds good. So we filled the bag with mortar, and was going to just squeeze the mortar in between the bricks, in the spaces between the bricks. Now I'm guessing that if you're strong enough, this probably should work, and it will make it super easy to just squeeze the mortar into the spaces. As you can see here, I've struggled with it for a good few minutes. No matter how much I twisted and no matter how much I squeezed, nothing came out of this bag. So I finally gave up and grabbed my trusty old spoon and just did this a little bit at a time with a spoon and with my hands, and that just worked fine for me. Is it hard? No. Is it time consuming? Yes. If I use the bag, then I would be done with this pretty quickly, but it took me a while to add the mortar in between the spaces because I literally did it with a spoon. I'm in no hurry to go anywhere, so that's just fine with me. Once the mortar is in place, give it 5 minutes or so to dry a little bit, and then use this tool that you can find in the masonry tool section at your home improvement store. It's called a brick jointer, steel brick jointer, and use the 3/8 inch side, and basically you kind of push the mortar into the space between the bricks with it, and it also gives the mortar that round look to it, which is pretty. Then you use this asphalt brush to brush the axis of the mortar off of the bricks. That's it, you guys. That's basically all that there is to this project. It's a lot of fun and not complicated at all. All that there is to do here is just let the mortar dry for about 24 hours. For the wall, I basically did the same thing. First, I installed my 1/4-inch concrete boards and cleaned them. Now, since I wanted the wall section to fit visually nicely with the floor section, I ended up gluing these strips of cement boards that I cut to the bottom. So the first row of bricks that I install on the wall can basically sit on those strips of concrete to raise them from the floor a little bit. If you want your bricks to start right from the floor, then just go ahead and do that. If you have a baseboard that you want them to start from, that's fine too. And if you want to raise them off the floor a little bit, then just use a piece of wood or maybe anything like that to space them. And it can be something that you glue in place, or it can be something that you just put there so the bricks can dry in place and then you can pull that out. Okay, so now I have my center line. You can see it running down the center, so I know how to position the bricks. I did have that opening for wires that I had to deal with, but that wasn't too hard. Basically just to match it with the floor, the first row, the bricks go on either side of the line. Now, the difference with installing thin bricks on the wall is that things are kind of weighing on each other. Each row is kind of leaning a little bit on the one under it. So what you want to do is install the first line, the first row, and then let it dry, let it rest for 12 hours or so, like overnight maybe, just so you know that these bricks that are on the bottom are where they need to be. Now, another difference between installing thin bricks on the floor or on the wall is that on the wall you kind of want to find spacers that will support the length of the brick. So since I used the 1/4-inch spacers on the floor and I had extra cement boards that are also 1/4-inch, I cut those thin strips of cement board and used those as my spacers. You might need to go ahead and cut thin pieces of wood, or I don't know, some other idea if you can come up with something, but you really want a spacer that is a strip of something that can support the whole length of the brick. And then as you go and install, you put the spacers in between each row, and all the time just go back and make sure with the level that you are that you're leveled with your rows. Now, I did use the orange spacers in between the bricks just to make sure that they are 1/4 of an inch apart or so. These spaces, take them with a grain of salt. It is very nice when things are not exact in this kind of work. The mortar is really beautiful, and if the bricks are not spaced exactly the same, I think it actually adds some character and it's pretty nice. Now, you do not need to wait 12 hours for the glue to dry after every row. It was just important for us to do it with the first one because everything is kind of need to be on top of that, and we wanted to make sure that it is held in place properly. But now you can go ahead and do a few rows at a time. I probably did maybe 5 to 10 rows at the time, and then just let it sit overnight and continued the day after. And once the rows that you worked on before are dry and the bricks are in place, then you can remove the spacers and use them for the new rows. Now, if you check your bricks and you see that you're not level, just use the little tiny pieces of brick that usually break off when you break the bricks to kind of shimmy them and straighten them. Once the bricks are in place and the wall is dry, you remove all of your spacers and then apply the mortar. We start from the top to the bottom. I put that plastic there so little pieces of mortar, as they fall off, they won't get stuck on the bottom spaces that I had there, because it does make quite a lot of mess. Now, if I could use the bag, then that will be again a much quicker option, and I would have started from the top and then just went down. But since I did it all by hand, then I just started on the bottom or wherever, it didn't matter at that point, and put the mortar in between the bricks and just basically did whatever I did on the floor section. Used the little metal tool to push it in and round it in a nice way, and then use the broom to brush it off. You can see the finished project here, the floor and the wall. I still have to run a wet sponge on it because the bricks are a little gray from the mortar, but I'll do that once we are done with installing the wood stove. Again, I will have links to the complete wood stove install video once it's done, and I'll also have a link below in the description to the blog where you can find links for materials and other resources and information for this project. That's it, you guys. Thanks for watching, and I sure hope this was helpful.